For Hitler, the Soviet capital was secondary. And he believed the only way to bring the Soviet Union to its knees was to defeat it economically. He felt this could be accomplished by seizing the economic resources of Ukraine east of Kiev. When Walter von Brauchitsch, commander-in-chief of the army, supported a direct thrust to Moscow, he was told that only ossified brains could think of such an idea. Franz Halder, head of the Army General Staff, was also convinced that a drive to seize Moscow would be victorious after the German army inflicted enough damage on the Soviet forces. This view was shared by most within the German High Command. But Hitler overruled his generals in favor of pocketing the Soviet forces around Kiev in the south. Followed by the seizure of Ukraine. The move was successful, resulting in the loss of nearly 700,000 Red Army personnel killed, captured, or wounded by September 26, and further advances by Axis forces. With the end of summer, Hitler redirected his attention to Moscow and assigned Army Group Center to this task. The forces committed to Operation Typhoon included 3 infantry armies supported by 3 panzer groups and by the Luftwaffe's Luftflotte II. Up to 2 million German troops were committed to the operation, along with 1,000 to 2,470 tanks and assault guns and 14,000 guns. German aerial strength, however, had been severely reduced over the summer's campaign. Luftflotte II had only 549 serviceable machines. The attack relied on standard blitzkrieg tactics. Using panzer groups rushing deep into Soviet formations and executing double pincer movements, pocketing Red Army divisions and destroying them. Facing the Wehrmacht were 3 Soviet fronts forming a defensive line based on the cities of Vyazma and Bryansk, which barred the way to Moscow. The armies comprising these fronts had also been involved in heavy fighting. Still, it was a formidable concentration consisting of 1,250,000 men, 1,000 tanks, and 7,600 guns. Once Soviet resistance along the Vyazma-Bryansk front was eliminated, German forces were to press east. Continuous fighting had reduced their effectiveness. And logistical difficulties became more acute. General Heinz Guderian, commander of the 2nd Panzer Army, wrote that some of his destroyed tanks had not been replaced. The German attack went according to plan, with 4th Panzer Group pushing through the middle nearly unopposed and then dividing its mobile forces north to complete the encirclement of Vyazma with 3rd Panzer Group and other units south to close the ring around Bryansk in conjunction with 2nd Panzer Group. The Soviet defenses, still under construction, were overrun, and spearheads of the 3rd and 4th Panzer Groups met at Vyazma on October 10, 1941. The Soviet Air Force had suffered appalling losses of some 7,500 to 21,200 aircraft. Extraordinary industrial achievements had begun to replace these. And at the outset of Typhoon, the VVS could muster 936 aircraft. .578 of which were bombers. For Soviet armies, the 16th, 19th, 20th, 24th and part of the 32nd were encircled in a large pocket just west of the city. The encircled Soviet forces continued to fight. And the Wehrmacht had to employ 28 divisions to eliminate them. Using troops which could have supported the offensive towards Moscow. The remnants of the Soviet Western and Reserve fronts retreated and manned new defensive lines around Mozhaysk. Although losses were high, some of the encircled units escaped in small groups, ranging in size from platoons to full rifle divisions. Soviet resistance near Vyazma also provided time for the Soviet High Command to reinforce the four armies defending Moscow, the 5th, 16th, 43rd and 49th Armies. Three rifle and 2 tank divisions were transferred from East Siberia with more to follow. The weather began to change, hampering both sides. German armored groups were greatly slowed, allowing Soviet forces to fall back and regroup. Soviet forces were able to counterattack in some cases. For example, on October 6 the 4th Panzer Division fell into them. As a scratch team of Soviet infantry contained their advance, Soviet armor attacked from both flanks and savaged the German Panzer IV tanks. For the Wehrmacht, the shock of this defeat was so great that a special investigation was ordered. Guderian guns could only explode a T-34 by hitting the engine from behind. Also noted in his memoirs that the Russians already learned a few things. Other counterattacks further slowed the German offensive. The Second Army, which was operating to the north of Guderian's forces with the aim of encircling the Bryansk front, "673,000 soldiers have been captured by the Wehrmacht in both the Vyazma and Bryansk pockets. Hitler had never had to lie about a specific and verifiable military fact. Dietrich convinced foreign correspondents that the collapse of all Soviet resistance was perhaps hours away. German civilian morale, low since the start of Barbarossa, significantly improved. With rumors of soldiers home by Christmas and great riches from the future Lebensraum in the east. However, Red Army resistance had slowed the Wehrmacht. When the Germans arrived within sight of the Mosheysk line west of Moscow on October 10th, they encountered another defensive barrier manned by new Soviet forces. That same day, Georgy Zhukov, who had been recalled from the Leningrad front on October 6th, took charge of Moscow's defense and the combined Western and Reserve fronts, with Colonel General Ivan Konyev as his deputy. On October 12th, Zhukov ordered the concentration of all available forces on a strengthened Mosheysk line. A move supported by General Vasilevsky of the General Staff. On October 15th, Stalin ordered the evacuation of the Communist Party. The General Staff and various civil government offices from Moscow to Kuibyshev, leaving only a limited number of officials behind. The evacuation caused panic among Muscovites. On 16 to 17 October, much of the civilian population tried to flee, mobbing the available trains and jamming the roads from the city. By October 13, 1941, the Wehrmacht had reached the Mosheysk defense line. A hastily constructed set of 4 lines of fortifications protecting Moscow's western approaches, which extended from Kalinin towards Volokholamsk and Kaluga. Despite recent reinforcements, only around 90,000 Soviet soldiers manned this line. Far too few to stem the German advance. Given the limited resources available, Zhukov decided to concentrate his forces at 4 critical points. The 16th Army under Lieutenant General Konstantin Rokossovsky guarded Volokholamsk. Mosheysk was defended by 5th Army under Major General Leonid Govorov. The 43rd Army of Major General Konstantin Golyabev defended Maloyaroslavets. And the 49th Army under Lieutenant General Ivan Zakharkin protected Kaluga. The entire Soviet Western Front. Nearly destroyed after its encirclement near Vyazma, was being recreated almost from scratch. Moscow itself was also hastily fortified. Despite these preparations, the capital was within striking distance of German tanks. With the Luftwaffe mounting large-scale air raids on the city. The Luftwaffe still controlled the sky wherever it appeared, and Stuka and bomber groups flew 537 sorties, destroying some 440 vehicles and 150 artillery pieces. On October 13, 1941, the Wehrmacht resumed its offensive. At first, the German forces attempted to bypass Soviet defenses by pushing northeast towards the weakly protected city of Kalinin and south towards Kaluga and Tula. Capturing all except Tula by October 14. Encouraged by these initial successes, the Germans launched a frontal assault against the fortified line. Taking Mozhaisk and Maloyaroslavets on October 18, Narofamensk on October 21. And Volokholamsk on October 27 after intense fighting. Because of the increasing danger of flanking attacks, Chukov was forced to fall back. Withdrawing his forces east of the Nara River. The goal of the German offensive under the codename Operation Typhoon was the destruction of the formations of the Red Army before Moscow and subsequently the capture of the city of Moscow itself. Despite initial successes of the Wehrmacht, which was able to encircle and destroy large parts of the Soviet defenders at Vyazma and Bryansk, the advance stalled by October 30, 1941, in the autumn mud and the strengthening Soviet resistance. Hitler was of the opinion that the capture of Moscow was not a priority. For the advance on Moscow, only the weakened infantry armies would remain, which were not up to this task in view of ongoing Soviet counterattacks. The Red Army had also not been able to compensate for the losses of tanks in the numerous battles of the previous months. After the enormous losses that the Red Army had suffered in the summer of 1941, it now lacked trained soldiers and officers. In the south, the 2nd Panzer Army initially advanced towards Tula with relative ease because the Mozhaisk defense line did not extend that far south and no significant concentrations of Soviet troops blocked their advance. However, bad weather, fuel problems, and damaged roads and bridges eventually slowed the German army. And Guderian did not reach the outskirts of Tula until October 26. The German plan initially called for the rapid capture of Tula, followed by a pincer move around Moscow. The first attack, however, was repelled by the 50th Army and civilian volunteers on October 29, after a fight within sight of the city. By late October, the German forces were worn out, with only a third of their motor vehicles still functioning, infantry divisions at third to half strength, and serious logistics issues preventing the delivery of warm clothing and other winter equipment to the front. Although 100,000 additional Soviet soldiers had reinforced Klin and Tula, where renewed German offensives were expected, Soviet defenses remained relatively thin. Nevertheless, Stalin ordered several preemptive counteroffensives against German lines. These were launched despite protests from Zhukov, who pointed out the complete lack of reserves. The Wehrmacht repelled most of these counteroffensives, which squandered Soviet forces that could have been used for Moscow's defense. The only notable success of the offensive occurred west of Moscow near Alexino. Where Soviet tanks inflicted heavy losses on the Fourth Army because the Germans still lacked anti-tank weapons capable of damaging the new, well-armored T-34 tanks. From October 31st to 13 to 15 November, the Wehrmacht High Command stood down while preparing to launch a second offensive towards Moscow. Although Army Group Center still possessed considerable nominal strength, its fighting capabilities have been vitiated by wear and fatigue. While the Germans were aware of the continuous influx of Soviet reinforcements from the east as well as the presence of large reserves, given the tremendous Soviet casualties, they did not expect the Soviets to be able to mount a determined defense. But there were also many Soviet troops still available in reserve armies behind the front. Finally, Soviet troops, and especially officers, were now more experienced and better prepared for the offensive. By November 15, 1941, the ground had finally frozen, solving the mud problem. The armored Wehrmacht spearheads, consisting of 51 divisions, could now advance, with the goal of encircling Moscow and linking up near the city of Noginsk, east of the capital. To achieve this objective, the German 3rd and 4th Panzer groups needed to concentrate their forces between the Volga Reservoir and Mazhaisk. Then proceed past the Soviet 30th Army to Klin and Solnechnogorsk, encircling the capital from the north. In the south, the 2nd Panzer Army intended to bypass Tula, still held by the Red Army, and advance to Kashira and Kolomna, linking up with the northern pincer at Noginsk. And constantly harassed the German divisions which were trying to make their way through the fortifications. The 3rd Panzer Army captured Klin after heavy fighting on November 23rd, Solnechnogorsk as well by November 24th and Istra by 24 to 25 November. Soviet resistance was still strong, and the outcome of the battle was by no means certain. Reportedly, Stalin asked Zhukov whether Moscow could be successfully defended and ordered him to speak honestly, like a communist. Zhukov replied that it was possible, but reserves were urgently needed. By November 27th, the German 7th Panzer Division had seized a bridgehead across the Moscow-Volga Canal. The last major obstacle before Moscow. The major buildings of the Soviet capital through their field glasses. Both Soviet strength left in a regiment. On the Russian side, discipline became ferocious. The NKVD blocking groups were ready to shoot anyone retreating without orders. NKVD squads went to field hospitals in search of soldiers with self-inflicted injuries. Those who shot themselves in the left hand to escape fighting. A surgeon in a field hospital of the Red Army admitted to amputating the hands of boys who tried this self-shooting idea to escape fighting, to protect them from immediate execution via punishment squad. In the south, near Tula, combat resumed on November 18, 1941, with the 2nd Panzer Army trying to encircle the city. The German forces involved were extremely battered from previous fighting and still had no winter clothing. As a result, initial German progress was only 3.1 to 6.2 miles per day. Moreover, It exposed the German tank armies to flanking attacks from the Soviet 49th and 50th Armies, located near Tula. Further slowing the advance. Guderian nevertheless was able to pursue the offensive, spreading his forces in a star-like attack. Taking Stalinogorsk on November 22, 1941 and surrounding a Soviet rifle division stationed there. On November 25, 1941, the German 2nd Panzer Army under Guderian began advancing towards Kashira that lay 120 kilometers south-southeast of Moscow and 80 kilometers north-northeast of Tula. The Germans were capable of seizing Venov and pushing towards storming formidably towards Kashira. Should Kashira fall, the road to Moscow would be open for the 2nd Panzer Group. In an attempt to halt the onslaught of the 2nd Panzer Group, the Stavka High Command hurled Major General Pavel Belov's 1st Guards Cavalry Corps, General Andrei Getman's 112th Tank Division, an armored brigade and a battalion of BM-13 Katyusha rocket launchers along with support from the Air Force against the Wehrmacht. The cavalrymen of the 1st Guards Cavalry Corps, which was primarily armed with the SVT-40 semi-automatic battle rifle and Cossack Shashkas, as well as the mechanized troops possessing T-34 and KV-1 tanks, battled relentlessly against Heinz Guderian's 2nd Panzer Group. After much vicious fighting, the 1st Guards Cavalry Corps was able to repel the armored forces of Guderian and subsequently drove them back by 40 kilometers to the town of Morges. The Germans were driven back in early December, securing the southern approach to the city. Tula itself held, protected by fortifications and determined defenders mostly from the 50th Army, made of both soldiers and civilians. In the south, the Wehrmacht never got close to the capital. The first stroke of the Western Front's counteroffensive on the outskirts of Moscow fell upon Guderian's 2nd Panzer Army. Because of the resistance on both the northern and southern sides of Moscow, on December 1st the Wehrmacht attempted a direct offensive from the west along the Minsk-Moscow highway near the city of Nerofominsk. After meeting determined resistance from the Soviet 1st Guards Motorized Rifle Division and flank counterattacks staged by the 33rd Army, the German offensive stalled and was driven back 4 days later in the ensuing Soviet counteroffensive. The European winter of 1941-42 was the coldest of the 20th century. 69. On November 30th, General Fedor von Bock claimed in a report to Berlin that the temperature was minus 45 degrees Celsius. Official Soviet Meteorological Service records show that at the lowest point, the lowest December temperature reached minus 28.8 degrees Celsius. These numbers indicated severely cold conditions, and German troops were freezing with no winter clothing, using equipment that was not designed for such low temperatures. The same cold weather hit the Soviet troops, but they were better prepared. German clothing was supplemented by Soviet clothing and boots, which were often in better condition than German clothes as the owners had spent much less time at the front. The Axis offensive on Moscow stopped. Guderian wrote in his journal that the offensive on Moscow failed. We underestimated the enemy's strength, as well as his size and climate. I stopped my troops on December 5th, otherwise the catastrophe would be unavoidable. Although the Wehrmacht's offensive had been stopped, German intelligence estimated that Soviet forces had no more reserves left and thus would be unable to stage a counteroffensive. This estimate proved wrong, as Stalin transferred over 18 divisions, 1,700 tanks, and over 1,500 aircraft from Siberia and the Far East after learning that Imperial Japan had no plans to invade the USSR in the near future from Richard Sorge. The Red Army had accumulated a 58-division reserve by early December, when the offensive proposed by Zhukov and Vasilevsky was finally approved by Stalin. Even with these new reserves, Soviet forces committed to the operation numbered only 1,100,000 men, only slightly outnumbering the Wehrmacht. Nevertheless, with careful troop deployment, a ratio of 2-to-1 was reached at some critical points. On December 5, 1941, the counteroffensive for removing the immediate threat to Moscow started on the Kalinin front. The Northwestern Front and Western Fronts began their offensives the next day. After several days of little progress, Soviet armies retook Solnechnegorsk on December 12 and Klin on December 15. Guderian's army beat a hasty retreat towards Venov and then Sukhinichi. On December 8th, Hitler had signed his Directive No. 39, ordering the Wehrmacht to assume a defensive stance on the whole front. German troops were unable to organize a solid defense at their initial locations and were forced to pull back to consolidate their lines. Guderian wrote that discussions with Hans Schmidt and Wolfram Freiherr von Richthofen took place the same day, and both commanders agreed the current front line could not be held. On December 14th, Halder and Gunther von Kluge finally gave permission for a limited withdrawal to the west of the Oka, without Hitler's approval. On December 20th, Hitler cancelled the withdrawal and ordered his soldiers to defend every patch of ground. Guderian protested, pointing out that losses from cold were actually greater than combat losses and that winter equipment was held up by traffic ties in Poland. Nevertheless, Hitler insisted on defending the existing lines. And Guderian was dismissed by December 25th, along with Generals Hoepner and Strauss, commanders of the 4th Panzer and 9th Army, respectively. Bach was also dismissed, officially for medical reasons. Brauchitsch had been removed even earlier, on December 19th. Meanwhile, the Soviet offensive continued in the north. The offensive liberated Kalinin and the Soviets reached Klin on December 7th, overrunning the headquarters of the 56th Panzer Corps outside the city. As the Kalinin front drove west, a bulge developed around Klin. As the Kalinin front drove west, a bulge developed around Klin. The Soviet front commander, Konyev, attempted to envelop any German forces remaining. Zhukov diverted more forces to the southern end of the bulge, to help Konyev trap the 3rd Panzer Army. But the Germans pulled their forces out in time. Although the encirclement failed, it unhinged the German defenses. A second attempt was made to outflank Army Group Center's northern forces, but met strong opposition near Rzhev and was forced to halt, forming a salient that would last until March 1943. In the south, the offensive went equally well, with Southwestern Front forces relieving Tula on December 16, 1941. A major achievement was the encirclement and destruction of the German 35th Corps, protecting Guderian's 2nd Panzer Army's southern flank. On January 4th, the skies cleared. The Luftwaffe was quickly reinforced, as Hitler hoped it would save the situation. The bomber squadrons KG-4 and KG-30 arrived from refitting in Germany, whilst 4 transport groups with a strength of 102 Junkers Ju-52 transports were deployed from Luftflotte 4 to evacuate surrounded army units and improve the supply line to the frontline forces. It was a last-minute effort and it worked. The German air arm was to help prevent a total collapse of Army Group Center. Despite the Soviets' best efforts, the Luftwaffe had contributed enormously to the survival of Army Group Center. Between the 17th and the 22nd of December, the Luftwaffe destroyed 299 motor vehicles and 23 tanks around Tula, hampering the Red Army's pursuit of the German army. In the center, Soviet progress was much slower. Soviet troops liberated Narofamensk only on December 26, Kaluga on December 28, and Maloyoroslavets on January 2, after 10 days of violent action. The Soviet reserves were annihilated, and the offensive halted on January 7, 1942, after having pushed the exhausted and freezing German armies back 62 to 155 miles from Moscow. Stalin continued to order more offensives in order to trap and destroy Army Group Center in front of Moscow. But the Red Army was exhausted and overstretched, and they failed. In any case, the outcome of this battle put an end to Hitler's hope of a fast victory. Furious that his army had been unable to take Moscow, Hitler dismissed Brauchitsch on December 19, 1941, and took personal charge of the Wehrmacht, effectively taking control of all military decisions. Hitler surrounded himself with staff officers with little or no recent combat experience. The Red Army's winter counteroffensive drove the Wehrmacht from Moscow. But the city was still considered to be threatened, with the front line relatively close. Because of this, the Moscow theater remained a priority for Stalin. On January 5, 1942, during a meeting in the Kremlin, Stalin announced that he was planning a general spring offensive, which would be staged simultaneously near Moscow, Leningrad, Kharkov, and the Crimea. This plan was accepted over Zhukov's objections. The defense of Moscow became a symbol of Soviet resistance against the invading Axis forces. To commemorate the battle, Moscow was awarded the title of Hero City in 1965, on the 20th anniversary of Victory Day. In Moscow, an annual military parade on Red Square on November 7th is held in honor of the October Revolution parade and as a substitute for the October Revolution celebrations that have not been celebrated on a national level since 1995. Both German and Soviet casualties during the Battle of Moscow have been a subject of debate. Chris Bellamy records Soviet losses as 926,224 irrecoverable and 1,806,123 between September 30th and April 20th, including the winter counteroffensive against Vyazma. The official Wehrmacht daily casualty reports show 35,757 killed in action, 128,716 wounded, and 9,721 missing in action for the entire Army Group Center between October 1, 1941 and January 10, 1942. However, this official report does not match, due to the normal accounting system was organized only in the middle of 1942. Historian Chris Bellamy estimates the Germans lost 581,000 troops and Soviets lost 1,029,234 troops, which included losses from the battles for Rzhev and Vyazma. In addition, the Wehrmacht lost 1,300 tanks, 2,500 guns, and more than 15,000 trucks and unarmored vehicles, mostly in their retreat from Moscow.